Along Florida's shoreline rises a grand estate that resembles a gilded fantasy crafted from marble and opulence. This is the shadowy tale of America's most divisive residence, Mar-a-Lago. Initially, it embodied the vision of a single ambitious woman, Marjorie Merriweather Post. She constructed Mar-a-Lago as her enduring domain, a lavish gathering space filled with merriment, even as the nation endured the Great Depression, global conflicts, and widespread hardship. Within its rooms, sparkling crystal chandeliers gleamed more brilliantly than the aspirations of countless citizens. Yet this estate transcended mere architectural splendor. Its corridors hosted influential figures capable of reshaping global events. In the beginning, it served as a venue for elegant soirees and discreet negotiations during the Cold War years. Later, the property transferred to a man destined for the presidency. Mar-a-Lago evolved beyond an exclusive retreat for the elite, emerging as an emblem of contention, controversy, and the resentment felt by a significant portion of the populace. In the very chambers where peace was once celebrated, conversations now revolve around classified papers, legal disputes, and fierce partisan clashes. How did this majestic edifice transform from a whimsical sanctuary into a battleground of shadowy transactions, shattered destinies, and perilous mysteries? And what secrets remain concealed beyond its imposing entrances? The structure emerges from the Florida coast as if summoned from a bygone era and distant land. Boasting 128 rooms, 58 bedrooms, 33 bathrooms, ceilings adorned with gold leaf that shimmer in the dawn light, and marble flooring imported from overseas. This is Mar-a-Lago, situated on Cedar Lake, extending from the Atlantic Ocean to the intracoastal waterway, across 17 acres intended as an idyllic haven. But prior to its conversion into a members-only club, before it accommodated a commander-in-chief, before the demonstrations, media frenzy, and government probes, it represented one woman's response to an inescapable dilemma. How does one purchase entry into a society that rejects you? This narrative chronicles that estate's journey, and like countless tales from American lore, it commences with immense fortune, staggering sums of wealth that unlocked countless opportunities, yet failed to breach the most critical barriers. We start with Marjorie Merriweather Post. Born in 1887, Marjorie took over the Postum Cereal Company, which later became General Foods. Upon her father's passing in 1914, she was just 27. Suddenly, she ranked among the richest women in the United States. Her net worth fluctuated with economic tides, but by the early 1920s, it reached tens of millions, equivalent to billions in modern terms. Such riches acquired her several grand properties, luxurious yachts, and art assemblages, destined for museum walls. It even facilitated 4 marriages, though it couldn't sustain a single one. Still, wealth eluded her deepest desire: full integration into the nation's most venerable and selective social strata. The issue boiled down to a straightforward yet insurmountable challenge for her. Marjorie embodied _0_. Her empire stemmed from breakfast cereals, everyday goods packaged for the average consumer. This differed from fortunes amassed through railroads, finance, or the gradual legacy of dynasties etched in historical records. The Astors condescended. The Vanderbilts offered courteous but cool interactions. At elite Newport events, Marjorie sensed an intangible barrier. Invitations arrived naturally. She was too affluent for total exclusion. But true belonging always slipped away. The exclusion wounded deeply. Marjorie possessed refined discernment. She amassed Russian imperial artifacts, French furnishings, and Renaissance masterpieces. Her hosting was extravagant, her philanthropy abundant, her intellect sharp and worldly. It all fell short. Established elite adhered to rigid codes, including this: cereal-derived wealth lacked gravitas. To grasp Marjorie's choice to erect Mar-a-Lago, one must recognize that underlying ache. The residence wasn't merely a seasonal retreat. It stood as a bold declaration, forged in stone and precious metals. You might spurn me, but you'll never overlook my presence. The site's selection was deliberate. By the 1920s, Palm Beach had blossomed into a favored winter escape for affluent northerners. Its weather was ideal, its shores stunning. However, the opulent homes along the barrier island largely belonged to those very clans that marginalized Marjorie. Thus, she resolved to create something grander, more awe-inspiring, rendering their estates seem almost understated. The plan to develop Mar-a-Lago took shape around 1924. Marjorie acquired the plot, a slim parcel on Palm Beach, for about $1.5 million, an enormous expenditure at the time. The site possessed distinctive qualities. The estate extended from the Atlantic Ocean eastward to Lake Worth westward, inspiring its Spanish name that translates to _1_Marjorie, enlisted the talents of architects Marion Sims Wythe and Joseph Urban. Her directives were exacting and ambitious. She envisioned a Spanish Moorish palace that echoed Europe's grand chateaus, yet asserted an unmistakably American boldness in its vastness and assurance. She insisted on tiles imported from the 1920s Civil Exposition. She demanded ceilings adorned with gold leaf. She required a tower prominent enough to catch the eye from the sea. In essence, she aimed to create an edifice too impressive to overlook. Groundbreaking occurred in 1925, with the project spanning 4 years. A labor-intensive endeavor forged in stone and toil. The effort dragged on. From 1925 through 1929, Mar-a-Lago gradually emerged from Palm Beach's sandy terrain. Erecting the residence went beyond mere construction. It involved transporting an elaborate dream across vast distances from distant shores and lands. Marjorie's designers drew from her blueprint, though that blueprint necessitated resources unavailable in Florida. The undertaking required 36,000 antique Spanish tiles, sourced from Spanish estates and raised structures. Exterior wall stone hailed from quarries that had once armed ancient Mediterranean palaces. Intricately carved wooden ceilings were crafted by Italian artisans. The dining room's enormous single slab of a table was so weighty that reinforcements were needed for the underlying floor. Even against Gilded Age benchmarks, the proportions were astounding. The primary residence spanned 62,500 square feet. The tower ascended dramatically into the Florida heavens, serving as both lighthouse and provocation, visible for miles. The initial layout featured 75 rooms, a count that expanded later. Each element embodied Marjorie's exacting notion of opulence. Bathroom tiles hand-painted, bedroom walls draped in silk, a grand white and gold ballroom capable of accommodating hundreds. Still, Mar-a-Lago transcended the opulent facade on display. To fully comprehend its magnitude, one must consider the hidden infrastructure sustaining the spectacle, an unseen metropolis, engineered for perpetual operation. The estate demanded a veritable battalion to operate. Subterranean kitchens linked to the upper levels via concealed service passages invisible to visitors formed vast underground expanses. Massive refrigeration chambers preserved provisions for lavish banquets. Laundry facilities managed the ceaseless stream of fabrics. Utility areas, veritable sanctuaries, contained the boilers and pumps ensuring habitability, including pioneering air conditioning, a rarity in the 1920s, particularly in humid Florida. The employees' barracks created their own insulated domain. Scores of personnel resided on the premises: chefs, housemaids, gardeners, repairmen, chauffeurs, private aides. In peak season, the property engaged 50 to 60 individuals, all essential to upholding the veneer of seamless sophistication. This shadow realm was crafted for invisibility. Utility stairs enabled staff navigation without impeding guest pathways. Kitchen doors oriented away from manicured landscapes. Marjorie sought flawlessness, but one that seemed ethereal, enchanting, never the product of overt exertion. Before the inaugural soiree, Mar-a-Lago's creation drew upon hundreds more hands. Local toilers, often Black and Hispanic men earning scant pay for survival essentials, shouldered the grueling tasks. Expert artisans arrived from Europe and the U.S. North. Accounts vary on totals, but ledgers indicate the crew swelled beyond 200 during peak building surges. The environment was grueling. Florida's sweltering heat and moisture turned outside labor into torment. Sandstone grit permeated the atmosphere. Positioning fragile, imported tiles under duress called for meticulous accuracy, as any setback spelled budget excesses that Marjorie's overseers wouldn't tolerate. Accidents were routine: tumbles from heights, lacerations from rock and crystal, bouts of heat prostration. These builders fashioned a marvel. Yet, save for rare mentions, their identities have faded from history. The expense was prodigious. Figures fluctuate, but scholars generally peg the outlay at $7 to $10 million, equivalent to over $150 million today. That sum addressed solely the structure, excluding decor, artwork Marjorie later acquired, or the ongoing upkeep that devoured further fortunes in subsequent years. The chronology amplified the drama. Mar-a-Lago, finished in 1929, coinciding with the stock market's collapse and the onset of the Great Depression. As Marjorie hosted galas in her resplendent ballroom, urban queues snaked for loaves of bread, while her team plated gourmet feasts on gilded porcelain. Households nationwide rationed simple sustenance. The disparity was stark, inescapably so. Despite efforts by much of Palm Beach's elite to gloss over it, Marjorie herself, evidently, never viewed this disparity as an ethical dilemma. She genuinely felt that her wealth generated employment, that her expenditures stimulated the economy, and that her support for artists and artisans benefited society at large. Whether the laborers toiling under the intense Florida sunlight shared her perspective remains unrecorded by history. The estate launched its inaugural complete season in early 1930. Marjorie hosted friends, associates from business, lesser European royalty, and figures whose company could elevate her status. Her gatherings soon gained mythic status. Bands performed in the grand ballroom. Champagne circulated freely, in defiance of the Prohibition era. The rosters blended celebrities from Hollywood, politicians from Washington, and financiers from Wall Street. Yet, the core motivation behind the endeavor lingered unresolved. Had she at last built a spectacle magnificent enough to dissolve the subtle barrier separating her from the established lineages, who still subtly regarded her as an interloper? The response, emerging gradually and harshly, would unfold over the ensuing years. 3 opulent winters passed, and the operations at Mar-a-Lago adhered to a schedule as meticulous as a timepiece. Each November, Marjorie journeyed from her property in upstate New York or her home in Washington. In the preceding weeks, the employees had been readying everything. Surfaces gleamed from polishing. Rooms were ventilated and cleaned thoroughly. Vases brimmed with new blooms in the foyer, and the pantry overflowed with supplies for prolonged hospitality. When Marjorie's vehicle rolled through the entrance, the residence appeared poised, timeless and flawless. As if anticipating her arrival, the winter social whirl commenced. Invitations were selected deliberately: envoys and their spouses, industrial magnates whose assets matched or surpassed Marjorie's, performers whose fame in the press lent an air of allure, and whenever possible, authentic European nobles, earls and ladies with legitimate pedigrees, tracing back generations, whose attendance she prized nearly above all else. The evening repasts were spectacles, far beyond mere sustenance. 30 or 40 attendees gathered in the stately dining hall, the board extending under ornate vaulted ceilings. Menus featured 7 courses, occasionally extended. Selections from Marjorie's vast wine reserves complemented each dish. Goblets sparkled in the glow of tapers. Dialogue navigated cautiously across neutral ground. Voyages, culture, elite circles, whispers, while avoiding the perils of politics, divisiveness, or genuine discord. Post-meal, visitors wandered to the dance hall or salon. There might be waltzing on occasion, or rounds of cards. Invariably, an aura prevailed of significance and selectivity, a venue that affirmed one's prominence. Yet sustaining this ballet required an intricate underbelly. As company savored fare above, the subterranean galleys functioned with disciplined efficiency akin to a barracks. Lead cooks directed squads of assistants and line workers. Entrees progressed from cutting boards to burners to platters in choreographed haste. One serving concluded, tableware whisked away. The subsequent ready to emerge. The swelter was unyielding. Flames roared on cooktops, furnaces blazed, vapors billowed from kettles, and the urgency persisted. Culinary crews endured 12-hour vigils for key occasions, often stretching further. Compensation stayed basic. Tasks proved arduous and hazardous. Singes from sizzling skillets and boiling liquids were commonplace. The pace offered no respite. Errors drew scrutiny, and leniency was scarce. Outside the cooking areas, washhouses confronted heaps of fabrics. Each cloth, serviette, and bedding from visitor suites demanded laundering, ironing, and folding impeccably. The duties were stifling, monotonous, and perpetual. The female-dominated teams managing them, nearly all women, began shifts at first light and departed past dusk during peak periods. On the grounds, caretakers maintained the 17-acre expanse in pristine order. Lawns sheared to uniform levels, shrubs sculpted with mathematical accuracy, palms inspected for ailments and weather wear. The briny breeze corroded iron and masonry, necessitating perpetual fixes. Tools required upkeep. The sea eroded the barrier along the shore, an inexorable, deliberate assault. Utility infrastructures claimed their portion of vigilance. Furnaces warmed water for scores of lavatories. Primitive cooling devices waged futile wars against the state's mugginess, demanding constant tending. Wiring networks were overseen to prevent blackouts at pivotal instants. Workers labored in dim chambers amid the din of engines, eyeing dials and tweaking controls to uphold the facade. The personnel inhabited a parallel realm, proximate in proximity yet remote in hierarchy. Their lodgings were decent relative to the era's norms, superior to numerous domestic positions. Still, the divide held rigidly. They accessed the primary building solely via allotted portals. They ascended via allotted flights of stairs. Staff members mastered the art of gliding through the spaces like ghosts, ever nearby yet seldom noticed. Marjorie appears to have regarded her employees with a form of benevolence she viewed as compassionate. She recalled their names, inquired about their loved ones, and handed out holiday bonuses, along with sporadic presents. Compared to other affluent bosses during the 1930s, she came across as equitable, perhaps even lavish. Still, equity and lavishness enforced a strict pecking order. It ensured that employees couldn't even imagine enrolling their kids in the elite academies attended by Marjorie's grandchildren. It meant a grand hall where workers might set out floral displays and buff the woodwork, but never join the revelry on the dance floor. That disparity persisted quietly, even if rarely voiced. Above stairs, visitors in formal attire savored bubbly drinks while swapping tales of their latest trips abroad. Below, Laborers in grimy attire lugged wine crates and scoured away kitchen fats from massive stoves. The estate thrived on such separations. The dream relied on them. Visitors arrived at Mar-a-Lago, seeking refuge from everyday life, entering a realm where elegance appeared seamless and plenty felt innate. Sustaining that mirage demanded unseen labor from unseen toilers. Certain nights, once the final visitors had retired and the plates were all cleaned with the dance hall's glow faded, Marjorie would wander the shadowed chambers by herself. The hush in those moments carried a distinct weight, deeper, more vacant than the anticipatory pause preceding a gathering. The puzzle she directed Mar-a-Lago to resolve echoed faintly in that quiet. Did this suffice? Had she at last validated what demanded validation? The splendid walls provided no response. Then came the wartime era and the mirage of lasting stability. Beyond Palm Beach, the wider world was transforming. As the 1930s drew to a close, Europe edged relentlessly toward conflict. Nazi Germany pushed its borders. Fascist Italy ramped up its belligerence. The fragile truce from 1918 was unraveling. In the capital, leaders debated the nation's involvement. In the city, households with kin across the ocean hung on every dispatch with worry. At Mar-a-Lago, the soirees pressed on. Marjorie sustained her seasonal festivities into the late 1930s with near-defiant regularity. The roster of invitees adjusted a bit. Fewer from Europe, more U.S. tycoons and armed forces leaders. Yet the customs remained fixed. Suppers at 8, twirling till the clock struck 12. The unspoken conviction that this bubble of riches and status would endure indefinitely. The spell held strong in part because Marjorie embraced it or willed it so. She'd crafted a bastion she deemed eternal, one to survive trends and upheavals. Mar-a-Lago embodied enduring stone, marble, skill, and artistry. To her, those elements defined resilience. They defined significance. Yet endurance proved far trickier than mere building. When the U.S. joined World War II in December 1941, the ground shifted entirely. Palm Beach, mirroring the nation, geared up for the fight. Youths from employee families signed up or got conscripted. Shortages hit even opulent residences. Essentials like sugar, butter, and fuel became scarce overnight. The Coast Guard set up watches along Florida's shores, scanning for German U-boats said to prowl the Atlantic perilously near the coastline. Mar-a-Lago was even proposed to authorities as a potential base for defense purposes. Officials turned it down. The property was too prominent, too exposed to protect, too cumbersome for actual troop activities. But Marjorie dove into support for the war with real vigor. She bankrolled health provisions. She organized events to peddle war bonds. She repurposed sections of her various properties into havens for injured troops. The conflict years revealed an unforeseen frailty in the estate, its susceptibility. Those robust stone barriers and gilded vaults, once unassailable, now seemed delicate, reliant on ongoing upkeep that the war disrupted. Fewer hands on deck left some areas dusty and deserted. The relentless, salty breeze, unchecked as before, started corroding fixtures and masonry. Elaborate plumbing and wiring begged for components, rerouted to the war machine, now in short supply. For the initial time, post-construction, Mar-a-Lago started revealing wear. Marjorie was growing older herself. At 58 by 1945, her union with Joseph Davies, the ex-envoy to the Soviet Union, had frayed. Her daughter, Nanaya, was carving out her independent existence, displaying scant enthusiasm for the elite circle Marjorie had fought to join. Her other offspring kept their distance too, wrapped up in personal pursuits and worries. The long-standing doubt that had shadowed Marjorie evolved. It morphed from fears of rejection to pondering who might desire this legacy after her departure. Clarity eluded her. Mar-a-Lago, dazzled, yet splendor exacted a toll. Annual upkeep costs for the estate alone soared into the hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Property taxes added a hefty burden. Salaries for the staff weighed heavily on the budget. Heating, power, water, and fixes to the property. It all devoured funds at a pace that even tested the limits of Marjorie's vast wealth. Moreover, the elite social circle the mansion was designed to captivate was evolving. The traditional clans and their gatekeepers were gradually relinquishing control over America's upper echelons. Fresh wealth was gaining traction, not just from serial empires but from film studios, petroleum fortunes, and later, tech innovations. The norms were evolving, yet too sluggishly for Marjorie, creating ambiguity around her own status. Even more concerning, her offspring showed no interest in it. The estate captured Marjorie's vision, her response to her personal scars. But her kids pursued their separate aspirations, grappled with their individual pains, and devised their own fixes. Not one of them desired the ongoing weight of a grand residence that required endless vigilance, expenditure, and both emotional and monetary commitment. Gradually, Marjorie started pondering the path ahead. What fate awaited such a home, once its architect could no longer sustain its significance? Was private ownership truly viable? Perhaps it should be gifted away, safeguarded as a landmark. Or was it just too costly, too unworkable, too bound to a single era's figure to endure unchanged? Straightforward solutions eluded her. Thus Marjorie followed her pattern for tackling daunting challenges. She pressed forward, pretending all was well. Post-war winters picked up again. Celebrations returned in full swing. Guest rosters received the usual meticulous attention. The employees carried out their unobtrusive duties, though a core change had taken hold. The enduring quality she had infused into the stone and marble now appeared fleeting. In truth, Mar-a-Lago would survive her. The structure was far too sturdy to disappear outright. Still, its eventual form, its next stewards, and whether echoes of her founding intent would persist, all hung in uncertainty. The estate, perched on its slender coastal plot, stunning yet exorbitant and growing mismatched with the era, anticipating a destiny its founder could scarcely envision anymore. 5. The unwanted gift. Marjorie finalized her choice in 1973, at the age of 86. Her vitality was fading. While her assets remained considerable, they had been sapped by years of upholding various properties, backing initiatives, and sustaining a lifestyle few could match. Mar-a-Lago's destiny demanded immediate resolution. Her approach embodied her national loyalty and persistent belief that the property could achieve the prominence she had long envisioned. She decided to bequeath Mar-a-Lago to the United States government. She pictured it serving as an official winter White House, a getaway for presidents to entertain international dignitaries amid settings that showcased America's affluence and refined heritage. This notion had roots in history. Past leaders had turned to personal hideaways. Franklin Roosevelt to Warm Springs, Harry Truman to Key West. To Marjorie, establishing a dedicated Florida winter White House felt both sensible and magnanimous. She prepared the will with precise stipulations. After her passing, Mar-a-Lago would transfer to federal hands for use as a presidential sanctuary or lodging for overseas dignitaries. The decor, artwork, curated collections, everything would remain intact with the estate. Marjorie was presenting not merely bricks and mortar, but an entire, meticulously prepared realm primed for occupancy. She passed away on September 12, 1973. Attorneys moved to implement the will. Officials launched their evaluation. That assessment veered far from Marjorie's expectations. National Park Service officials arrived to assess the site. Their eventual assessment was exhaustive and harsh. Indeed, Mar-a-Lago was stunning. Indeed, it held historical value. Indeed, it exemplified 1920s architectural and decorative excellence. However, and this proved the crux, it was wildly unsuitable for governmental purposes. Operating expenses were astronomical. Initial projections indicated annual federal outlays of $1 to $2 million, merely for essential maintenance. This accounted for everyday preservation, utilities, personnel pay, protection, and coverage, excluding inevitable large-scale fixes or updates. Protection posed yet another grave challenge. Mar-a-Lago occupied a thin land tongue, flanked by ocean on one side and lake on the other. Entry routes abounded. The boundary stretched long and tough to monitor. Securing it for presidential visits would demand extensive alterations, barriers, entrances, monitoring techs, sentry stations that would rack up further millions while irrevocably altering the ground's essence. The site's position created its own hazards. Palm Beach functioned like an island connected to the mainland via just a handful of bridges that could be swiftly obstructed. During a crisis, be it a storm, a threat to safety, or a health emergency, getting the president and the team out would prove challenging. The closest big airport lay miles distant. The nearest key military base was even more remote. And don't forget the locals. Folks in Palm Beach had put up with Marjorie's lavish gatherings since she ultimately belonged to their circle, affluent, rooted, and woven into the fabric of high society. But a steady stream of federal operations, complete with barriers, perimeters, and non-stop bustle, was a whole different story. Local officials stated outright that they wouldn't accept a large-scale government outpost. The Parks Department, though sorry to say it, determined that taking the donation would be fiscally unwise. Mar-a-Lago proved too pricey, too unworkable, too tough to protect and upkeep. They advised turning it down. By 1981, following prolonged court battles and discussions, the authorities officially gave Mar-a-Lago back to Marjorie's heirs. The vision of a seasonal presidential retreat fizzled out almost as soon as it started. That dismissal likely hurt, even from beyond the grave. Marjorie had devoted her days to crafting a legacy that demanded admiration, something impossible to overlook or brush aside. In that way, she'd triumphed, yet she hadn't managed to make others truly desire it. Mar-a-Lago grappled with the very issue that had long trailed Marjorie: overabundance. The place was just too extravagant, too vast, too expensive, too needy, too bound to one woman's precise vision of splendor. What shone as a bold declaration of fortune became a weighty obligation the instant others had to assume ownership. The estate's managers confronted a tough dilemma. If the U.S. government passed on this asset, who else might step up? For most of the early 1980s, the residence stood largely abandoned. A minimal crew maintained the essentials. Sections of the building were sealed. Dust settled on spots that once sparkled in chandelier glow. The grounds, lacking steady care, edged into overgrowth. Seawater continued its steady erosion. Mar-a-Lago remained stunning, deserted, and growing more urgent in its need for someone, anyone, to handle its immense expenses and intricacies. That unlikely figure was already hovering nearby. He was youthful, driven, fixated on the spotlight, and certain he could spin nearly anything into a money-making enterprise. His name was Donald Trump, and he was poised to reshape Marjorie's aspiration in ways she couldn't have foreseen. 6. Enter the showman. Donald Trump first encountered Mar-a-Lago in 1985. At 39, he was thriving amid New York property ventures and eager for a venture that would show he wasn't merely wealthy, he was influential. Trump Tower had debuted 3 years prior. His surname shone across Manhattan's skyline. Still, New York, despite its allure, teemed with rival builders, family empires, and rival boasts of success. Florida offered a fresh start. Wide open land, endless sun, and the opportunity to claim a one-of-a-kind estate already rich in legacy and status. Trump's opening gambit was bold as ever. He bid $5 million for Mar-a-Lago, a sliver of its construction price, and a figure underscoring the site's fundamental flaw. As a sound business move, it barely held value. The estate's overseers, reportedly miffed, rejected it. Trump countered by purchasing the beachfront lot right in front of Mar-a-Lago for $2 million. He announced intentions to erect tall condos there, obstructing the home's sea vista and slashing its leftover worth. It's uncertain if he planned to proceed or just sought bargaining power. Either way, it paid off. Confronted with the risk of their seaside gem turning into a viewless has-been amid skyscrapers, the managers returned for talks. In 1985, Trump secured Mar-a-Lago, along with its contents, for about $8 million altogether. A hefty bargain, relative to building expenses, yet seemingly the most feasible deal available. Trump's first hurdle mirrored the one that had stumped Washington. The estate devoured cash at a staggering pace. Upkeep ran into hundreds of thousands annually. Taxes hit hard for such a private home. The structure was ridiculously immense. It required staffing and outlays that struck even Trump as extravagant. His solution played to his knack for monetizing prestige. He'd turn Mar-a-Lago into an exclusive club. The shift kicked off in 1995. Trump poured roughly $3 million into updates, improving wiring, updating cooking areas, and restoring chambers worn down by decades of scant maintenance. Nevertheless, the essence of the estate stayed intact. The grand ballroom, the elegant dining hall, the gilded ceilings, and the exquisite imported tiles were all preserved. Trump recognized that his product wasn't about luxury or ease, but rather entry into a distinct kind of dream. The membership structure was straightforward. Initiates shelled out an upfront fee, starting at $100,000 and soon bumped up to $200,000, along with yearly fees, around $14,000. For that, they gained entry to the grounds, meals at the estate's eateries, the pool and shoreline, and above all, the prestige of claiming affiliation with Mar-a-Lago. He promoted the club aggressively, chatting with design publications, offering guided visits to elite journalists, and orchestrating pictorial features that captured him amid the splendor, suggesting that joining would bring rub-elbows encounters with stars and influencers. His pitch was pointed and unwavering. Mar-a-Lago transcended a mere club. It was an exclusive network, and belonging signaled you'd made it. Not everyone in Palm Beach high society was won over. The area already boasted its stalwarts like the Bath and Tennis Club and the Everglades Club, whose legacies dated back generations and whose rosters were protected like classified documents. Those venues had previously turned down Trump's bids for membership, apparently due to his ostentatious style and connections to the gaming industry. His riposte was to position Mar-a-Lago as intentionally distinct, whereas the old guard clung to exclusionary rules barring Jews and African Americans, customs that were growing contentious yet lingered. Trump declared Mar-a-Lago welcoming to all, irrespective of faith or ethnicity. Debate persists on whether this stemmed from conviction, calculation, or a blend thereof. Regardless of intent, it paid off. In short order, the club boasted hundreds of enrollees. The sign-up charges alone raked in millions. The recurring fees ensured steady income. Trump had cracked the estate's core dilemma. He'd devised a method for others to foot the bill for upholding Marjorie's vision. Still, the operation went beyond commerce. Right away, Trump leveraged Mar-a-Lago as a platform for his aspirations. He threw extravagant soirees designed to grab media attention. He courted lawmakers, sports figures, performers, anybody evoking clout or notoriety. From the grounds, he fielded press sessions posed against lavish backdrops that amplified his desired persona. Mar-a-Lago was evolving into the hub Marjorie might have envisioned all along. A venue for pivotal occurrences, assemblies of notables, forums for consequential choices. Lingering uncertainty surrounded whether such gatherings, figures, and rulings would ultimately respect the estate or warp it into a shadowier version than Marjorie ever foresaw. The resolution loomed. But it demanded another 10 years and a vote that rocked the globe. 7. Rethinking the winter White House, the 2016 election upended it all. Donald Trump's November victory over Hillary Clinton, an outcome that floored experts and forecasters alike, instantly elevated Mar-a-Lago's profile. The site, once dismissed by Washington as unfeasible, overly costly, and troublesome for official duties, was poised to serve precisely that role, not formally, but effectively. Trump signaled his plans without delay. He'd devote considerable time there as president. He'd entertain world dignitaries on site. He'd handle state affairs from the premises. The winter White House Marjorie had proposed in her bequest was at last materializing, albeit in a form unimaginable to her. Challenges arose swiftly. Protection needs surged. Secret Service teams swarmed Palm Beach, reshaping the plush retreat into a near bastion. Barriers sprang up on nearby roads. U.S. Coast Guard vessels cruised the adjacent seas. The overhead skies turned no-fly zones. Personnel vetted all arrivals, even longtime members who'd invested fortunes for seamless elite entry. Expenses soared, but unlike Marjorie's earlier pitch to Uncle Sam, these burdens didn't fall on Trump. American taxpayers covered the safeguards, presidential shielding, and orchestration of shifting government functions to a for-profit venue. Figures fluctuated, but accounts indicated each trip there drained millions in protective and logistical outlays. Locals in Palm Beach, who'd viewed the club with ambivalence, now confronted disruptions dwarfing their worst expectations. Avenues shut down during his stays. Congestion mounted at perimeter posts. The serene, meticulously maintained exclusivity of Palm Beach was routinely disrupted by convoys of vehicles, whirring helicopters, and the unrelenting clamor of presidential operations. Legal battles ensued. Local residents filed suits in court, citing excessive noise, gridlocked roads, and declining real estate prices as their grievances. The municipal board convened heated sessions debating Donald Trump's official domicile. Reports indicated that Mar-a-Lago's original deed contained a provision restricting the estate to club purposes only, prohibiting full-time living, a condition Trump was now boldly defying. These disputes unfolded in community tribunals and splashed across major news outlets, transforming the once elegant venue into a persistent arena for juridical and partisan strife. However, the true transformation went beyond practical issues. It was profoundly emblematic. Mar-a-Lago evolved into a potent symbol of the divisions tearing through the United States during Trump's presidency. To his admirers, the grand residence stood for triumph and ambition realized. He had revived a neglected asset, turning it into a revenue-generating powerhouse. As the nation's leader, he retained control over an expansive portfolio of properties. The opulent gilded ceilings and polished marble surfaces symbolized the vitality and self-assurance of American enterprise. Entertaining international dignitaries at Mar-a-Lago struck them as evidence that individual business acumen could rival or even eclipse the stately elegance of the White House itself. To detractors, though, Mar-a-Lago epitomized the perilous fusion of governmental authority and personal gain. Trump personally held the club's ownership. Revenue flowed from dues and gatherings. Overseas officials and business entities seeking influence could gain entry merely by signing up as members or booking events on the premises. Post-election, the initiation fee surged to $200,000, a sum that now promised not only elite social standing, but also possible encounters with the commander-in-chief. The moral dilemmas were grave and largely uncharted territory. Patrons might eavesdrop on confidential discussions. World leaders lodged in accommodations owned by Trump's enterprise. Policy deliberations occurred amid diners who had paid for their seats. The boundary separating civic responsibilities from commercial interests grew faint, then vanished altogether. Certain events crystallized these apprehensions vividly. In February 2017, Trump welcomed Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to Mar-a-Lago. While dining on the open-air patio amid fellow clubgoers, news broke of a North Korean ballistic missile test. Trump and Abe conferred openly at the table as onlookers observed and snapped pictures with their smartphones. Reports suggested sensitive papers lay exposed on the surface. Safeguards that would be standard in the White House appeared overlooked or inadequately applied. The occurrence sparked widespread fury. Democratic lawmakers in Congress pushed for probes. Specialists in ethics decried it as a flagrant violation of fundamental protective measures. A few Republicans voiced discomfort, despite the bulk offering overt backing. Trump dismissed the backlash as a politically motivated assault. He maintained that Mar-a-Lago was fortified adequately. All members underwent screening. No misconduct had occurred, he claimed. The uproar, in his view, stemmed from adversaries who despised him and envied his accomplishments. Yet this episode exposed a more profound evolution. Mar-a-Lago's essence had morphed once more. It transcended its roots as a mere estate or upscale retreat. It had turned into a theater where executive authority, financial interests, ideological messaging, and authentic threats to national defense intersected in unprecedented fashion. Unlike any other structure in U.S. annals, the domain Marjorie had crafted to affirm her stature had attained relevance on a magnitude beyond her wildest dreams. But this prominence bore a shadow she would never have embraced. A shadow poised to intensify. The darkest phase loomed, arriving via unassuming containers. 8 crates in the Grand Hall. Those crates showed up in January 2021. As Donald Trump departed the White House following his defeat in the 2020 race to Joe Biden, he departed with an unprecedented haul for any ex-president. Volumes of official paperwork. Portions consisted of everyday letters. Others included bureaucratic logs. And some, per subsequent federal inquiries, comprised restricted files from confidential up to top-secret levels, encompassing details on atomic armaments, military strategies, spy networks, and delicate foreign exchanges. This cash journeyed from the Capitol to Mar-a-Lago in plain cardboard cartons. Initial accounts pegged the count at around 15 boxes, although the precise tally would spark later arguments. They were first stashed in a subterranean locker, then relocated to various areas across the grounds, including, prosecutors from the federal level alleged, the ballroom where Marjorie's visitors had waltzed under shimmering gilded vaults long ago. Initially, knowledge of these files remained confined to Trump's inner circle, but come early 2022, the National Archives, the government body tasked with safeguarding executive archives, discovered a substantial shortfall. Authorities called for their handover. Trump's team engaged in discussions with authorities. In January 2022, a portion of the documents was returned. Yet National Archives personnel quickly spotted classified labels on items that were never meant to depart protected federal sites. This prompted the Department of Justice to launch a criminal probe. Subpoenas were issued shortly after. Trump's legal counsel combed through Mar-a-Lago and assured officials that every classified item had been handed over. Come June 2022, They submitted an affidavit confirming as much under oath. That statement proved untrue. Law enforcement already possessed proof that sensitive files remained at the estate. Then, on August 8, 2022, FBI personnel carried out a search warrant on the premises. The operation marked a milestone, as no ex-president had undergone such scrutiny before. The agents spent hours traversing the rooms of Mar-a-Lago, snapping photos of the areas and confiscating documents. By the end, they retrieved over 100 more classified papers, including ones bearing the most restricted designations. Court-released images from subsequent filings revealed the extent of the disarray. Papers strewn on the floor of an apparent storage space, with prominent classification labels in plain view. Top Secret SCI, denoting sensitive compartmented information that, if leaked to enemy spies, could supposedly endanger U.S. missions and endanger lives. All this had been kept in a venue, frequented by countless club patrons, event crews, upkeep personnel, and visitors. A spot ideal for nuptials and business gatherings. A structure on a readily reachable coastal strip, linked to the continent via ordinary streets and a span. Trump responded swiftly and with intense anger. He labeled the incursion a raid, a violation, and an overreach of authority. He alleged the FBI had fabricated proof. He maintained that the files were declassified despite lacking any official documentation to support it. He contended that, in his presidential role, he held unlimited rights to remove any items he chose. His allies rallied behind him. For them, the raid symbolized a covert government plot. Demonstrators assembled beyond Mar-a-Lago's entrance. Right-leaning outlets criticized the FBI's intentions and methods. GOP leaders condemned the Justice Department, portraying the inquiry as nothing but partisan maneuvering. Opponents viewed the matter in stark contrast. An ex-leader who had taken classified files, defied efforts to reclaim them, permitted his lawyers to submit misleading declarations, and kept vital intel in a leisure hub where routine protection fell to civilian staff skilled in service, not espionage defense. Prosecutors assembled a grand jury. By June 2023, Trump faced indictment on 37 charges tied to the improper handling of classified materials and interference with justice. Additional accusations came soon afterward. The matter landed with Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida's Southern District. A trial date was scheduled, only to be delayed. A stack of legal challenges mounted. Trump's defense assailed the warrant itself, the accusations, the prosecutor's mandate, virtually every element of the government's case. The proceedings turned into yet another arena in the broader clash over Trump, where both factions were utterly certain of their integrity and the adversary's deceit. Still, amid the partisanship and rhetoric, a basic, tangible reality endured. Sensitive documents had lingered in a palatial home designed for entertainment. The grand hall at the epicenter of the uproar had borne witness to almost 100 years of Mar-a-Lago's evolutions. It had accommodated Marjorie's meticulously planned banquets. It had hosted Trump's lavish club soirees. It had entertained envoys amid his White House tenure. Today, in court papers and media coverage, it was cast as either a site of wrongdoing or the target of a baseless persecution, wholly depending on the speaker. The property, long centered on facades and exuding influence and stature, now anchored debates over whether that influence had been misused and if those facades concealed true peril. Mar-a-Lago had achieved its pinnacle of notoriety and weight. The lingering uncertainties involved the toll of that weight and who would bear it in the end. Those resolutions hung in limbo, tangled in courtroom battles and partisan strife. Meanwhile, the estate persisted in its peculiar dual functions: private retreat, emblem of ideology, ongoing probe location, and emblem of U.S. extravagance in its multifaceted glory. 9. After the sirens, who pays for dreams? The court battles dragged on. Yet daily life at Mar-a-Lago pressed forward. Couples continued reserving the ballroom for ceremonies. Members savored meals on the ocean view patio. Crews tended to floral displays and buffed utensils. The unseen operations that had sustained the estate since Marjorie's era, the meticulous upkeep, the unwavering focus on precision, endured untouched by scandals or scrutiny. Such endurance posed a tougher inquiry. When does the symbolic weight of a location eclipse its tangible existence? When rival narratives, clashing and laden with political fervor, begin to overshadow the actual structure. Mar-a-Lago embodied every one of these facets simultaneously. It functioned as an active social venue, served as an ex-president's dwelling, drew federal scrutiny, and emerged as an emblem wielded by opposing political factions to bolster their claims. Nevertheless, it remained a structure requiring everyday upkeep from individuals whose identities rarely surfaced in those accounts. The employees sustaining Mar-a-Lago in 2023 formed part of a lineage dating to the 1920s. Maids dusted the identical chambers their forebears had tended. Landscapers nurtured offspring of the original palms. Culinary teams whipped up dishes in kitchens updated across the years, yet devoted to the enduring task of nourishing affluent visitors drawn to a venue of perceived importance. These laborers encountered Mar-a-Lago's upheavals in stark contrast to club patrons or pundits on screen. For them, the estate wasn't primarily an icon. It was a source of employment. Legal entanglements posed threats of reduced hours. Demonstrations and their counterparts involved maneuvering past throngs and barriers merely to clock in. Press scrutiny brought occasional queries from journalists, which contracts prohibited them from answering. Their bond with the estate diverged sharply from others. Members shelled out for brushes with glamour. Leaders leveraged it to broadcast affiliations. Trump regarded it as residence and investment alike. The staff relied on its smooth operation to secure paychecks that, though superior to typical hospitality roles in Palm Beach by some reports, paled against the opulence surrounding them. This financial dynamic had persisted from Marjorie's time, yet it sharpened into sharper relief and greater unease as Mar-a-Lago's partisan connotations intensified. The very edifice that evoked triumph in America, for certain observers, and rot for detractors, represented to its workforce merely a venue for toil. Grueling, typically overlooked labor that underpinned each gathering, each conclave, each staged image. The parallels to history were unmistakable. Marjorie had constructed Mar-a-Lago with artisans whose contributions faded from chronicles. Trump sustained it via personnel whose profiles remained obscure. Save for mishaps like breaches in protocol, conflicts, or stray words to the media, the residents devoured their hours and exertion, all while channeling focus skyward to proprietors, visitors, and the theatrics unfolding amid its ornate interiors. Extending past the core team, the estate's influence extended into broader, harder-to-quantify spheres. Palm Beach locals grappled with roadblocks and security holdups. Nearby enterprises occasionally profited from tourist surges or forfeited trade from those evading the turmoil. Real estate prices adjacent to the grounds fluctuated, depending on views of presidential proximity as boon or burden. Environmental tolls lingered too. Seldom invoked in partisan debates, but starkly evident. Sustaining 17 acres of impeccably groomed terrain in Florida, guzzled vast water quantities. Regulating climate in such a vast construct consumed endless power. The property perched on a barrier island, ever more exposed to encroaching oceans and fiercer storms. These same climatic pressures would inevitably compel decisions on fortification, for a home erected nearly upon the surf. Such grounded elements coexisted with and beneath the metaphorical layers. Mar-a-Lago stood as both emblem of extravagance and job site, partisan cudgel and precarious edifice on subsiding terrain, national debates flashpoint, and routine workstation where folks merely aim to wrap up and depart. Grasping the estate's complete tale demanded embracing every angle at once, not selecting a singular account as gospel, but recognizing Mar-a-Lago's multiplicity, its splintered essence, and how varied lives navigated those fragments so profoundly. Marjorie had erected Mar-a-Lago to resolve her own quests for inclusion and import. The structure had soared to prominence she could scarcely have envisioned. Yet the puzzle of inclusion, who gained entry, who faced exclusion, who profited, and who bore quiet costs, stayed as knotted and open as before. The mansion endured on its slender coastal plot, alluring amid controversy, lavish, contested, reliant on unending toil from those who'd never claim ownership, and endless discourse from outsiders who'd never cross its threshold. The sea pressed relentlessly against the barrier wall. Sightseers captured images from nearby shores. Agitators and backers enacted their standoffs at the entrance. Within, the routine duties persisted. Staff polished the floors, cooked the meals, wiped down the chandeliers, and pruned the hedges. The vision Marjorie had crafted endured, yet endurance fell short of triumph. The key issue remained: would the owners, visitors, detractors, or distant observers glean any insights from Mar-a-Lago's bizarre evolution from personal indulgence to national hotspot? Part 10. The estate as a reflection. The takeaways existed, plainly, but whether people opted to recognize them posed a separate dilemma. Mar-a-Lago's almost 100-year saga captured America's paradoxes with stark precision. The property served as a looking glass, its revelations shaped by the viewer's perspective and their readiness to confront reality. To certain eyes, Mar-a-Lago embodied American superiority in its most brilliant form. A resolute woman of means and drive erected a marvel. A savvy investor saved it from ruin and transformed it into a thriving enterprise. A commander-in-chief leveraged it to showcase U.S. strength and assurance to foreign dignitaries. In this account, the tale celebrated private initiative thriving amid governmental shortcomings, with trailblazers forging worth and splendor via foresight and determination. For different observers, those identical developments painted a far grimmer picture. An affluent heiress constructed a self-glorifying edifice amid nationwide hardship and disparity. A dealmaker commodified proximity to influence, erasing moral boundaries. A leader intertwined self-enrichment with official responsibilities, to the point where separation seemed unattainable. Here, the narrative exposed rampant fortune, eroded systems, and privileged classes operating under exclusive guidelines. Each interpretation held validity. Each omitted vital elements. Mar-a-Lago's authentic chronicle proved far more tangled and nuanced than either ideological side cared to admit. It chronicled toil, countless employees across eras whose expertise and dedication erected and upheld a site they could never patronize. It explored drive, Marjorie's frantic bid to buy social approval, Trump's unyielding craving for spotlight, and how structures turn into containers for desires that grand designs can't wholly fulfill. It delved into social strata in the U.S., the chasm between servers and the served. A gap that scarcely narrowed, regardless of the affluent signature on the title or the administration in power. The artisans who chiseled rock and laid flooring in the late 1920s, and the crew swapping sheets and serving dishes in the early 2020s, clung to comparable positions in the hierarchy, divided by time, yet bound by the enduring pattern, their efforts sustaining another's extravagance. It examined how U.S. society romanticizes riches. Marjorie thought lavish excess would compel admiration. Trump figured enveloping himself in splendor would affirm his stature. Both held partial truths and flaws. The residence indeed seized focus. It projected authority. It conferred a form of prestige, yet it also unveiled the emptiness core to authority that's largely performative. The sensation of gilded vaults and exotic stone appearing grand yet vacant, alluring yet oddly purposeless. The estate further illustrated how swiftly communal and personal agendas blend at peaks of affluence. Marjorie's bid to donate Mar-a-Lago to the state fell through, but Trump's deployment of it as a White House venue prevailed, sparking the very ethical clashes her spurned offering aimed to prevent. The structure laid bare flaws in moral codes, shaky presumptions, and unspoken standards for executive actions, along with the true limits of permissible behavior. Above all, Mar-a-Lago's arc underscored what the public spotlighted versus what it subtly overlooked. The uproar over secret files fueled fierce partisan battles, but the unseen decades of maintenance labor sustaining the property scarcely entered the discourse. Court battles regarding Trump's stay made news, yet the ecological vulnerability of opulent homes on sandy shores drew scant ongoing scrutiny. Pundits pored over membership fees meticulously, while the wages and welfare of the employees enabling the club got far less rigorous analysis. Such selective focus mirrored wider societal tendencies. Sensationalism spread rapidly. Extravagance attracted lenses. Rivalries among elites seemed pressing, as influence inherently does. The gradual systemic inquiries: who performs what tasks for what compensation, who bears what burdens to grant others what pleasures, lingered softly, tougher to ignite fury, simpler to relegate to the sidelines. Mar-a-Lago had morphed into an icon, but icons simplify and warp intentionally. The estate wasn't merely virtuous or villainous, nor solely a testament to triumph or a shrine to wrongdoing. It embodied elements of both, while fitting neither label entirely. This intricate site harbored a tangled history that resisted reduction to any straightforward interpretation. The residence had survived beyond its founder's era. It was likely to endure past its present steward as well. The lingering issue centered on its future evolution, and if that progression would stem from intentional choices or mere momentum, guided by those possessing sufficient funds and ambition to seize control. Structures don't select their proprietors or functions. Humans make those calls. The choices surrounding Mar-a-Lago, opting to safeguard it, adapt it for new uses, impose controls, declare it unfit, or allow its odd blended life to persist, would reveal much about the nation's core principles and focuses. The edifice loomed as a fixed emblem in granite and stone. The true challenge lay in whether observers would confront it candidly, perceiving not only their favored image of the country, but the complete image, including the inconsistencies, the expenses, and the actual individuals whose efforts and existences had been invested in every ornate detail and gleaming surface. 11. Accountability and paths to change. Confronting the image head-on marked just the initial move. The tougher inquiry involved deciding how to act on the insights gained. Mar-a-Lago operated within a regulatory and moral structure ill-suited to an entity of its nature. A ex-leader holding a profit-making asset amid possible re-election bids generated clashes that prevailing laws struggled to even articulate, much less manage. An exclusive gathering spot that doubled as an official presidential locale occupied an ambiguous realm, bridging commerce and governance, recreation, and state duties, untouched by adequate oversight. However, the dilemmas Mar-a-Lago highlighted transcended a single property or individual. They were foundational, embedded in frameworks that deemed vast fortunes inherently valid and equated monetary achievement with moral worth, skill, or fate. The estate's legacy illuminated multiple domains where U.S. culture ought to reassess its premises. Primarily, the interplay of riches and governance authority called for a sharper, more forthright examination. The reported perk of Mar-a-Lago affiliation, granting closeness to an incumbent chief executive, wasn't a system flaw. It exemplified an intensified instance of how funds consistently secure entry. Political contributions, advocacy efforts, fiscal allocations, research institute support, and cycles of staff moving from oversight roles to regulated sectors, all served as conduits converting capital into sway. Mar-a-Lago rendered this dynamic more tangible and observable. Addressing it demanded systemic reforms beyond mere indignation, robust ethical guidelines with enforceable penalties, oversight bodies delivering tangible repercussions, disclosure mandates revealing interactions, venues, and intents. This would entail recognizing that nearness to authority constitutes a prized commodity, that entry functions as a form of exchange, and that, permitting its outright purchase, fosters a governance tilted toward those able to afford admission. Next, the handling of workforce demanded a candid evaluation. Each grand home, upscale retreat, and meticulously arranged emblem of affluence depended on individuals whose roles were habitually underappreciated and overlooked. Debates over Mar-a-Lago revolved around possession, legality, and metaphors. Meanwhile, the personnel maintaining its operations scarcely entered the narrative, an omission woven into the fabric. It bolstered the appealing illusion that prosperity emerges spontaneously, that opulence arises organically from ingenuity and toil, instead of systematic drawing of worth from others' hours and exertions. Incorporating the staff into view, learning their identities, grasping their routines and safeguards, guaranteeing equitable compensation and respect, would necessitate facing harsh realities about the true origins of USEs and who shoulders the burden. Finally, approaches to conserving and utilizing landmark sites warranted fresh consideration. Mar-a-Lago held architectural merit irrespective of its partisan entanglements. Margery's Iberian roof elements, the sculpted overheads, the quirky yet precise aesthetic decisions, all carried authentic cultural and temporal significance, yet this worth remained barricaded by dues and barriers, reachable mainly by those capable of substantial payments. Alternatives existed nationwide. Period residences had transformed into exhibits, learning centers, repositories, and communal areas. Such shifts affirmed that certain edifices transcend private holdings, their narratives shared by broader audiences beyond momentary title holders. Mar-a-Lago holds the potential to reveal narratives from the Gilded Age, explorations of architecture as personal legend-building, insights into labor dynamics and social hierarchies, and the tensions between affluence and democratic ideals, realizing that vision would require a level of political commitment that's missing for now. Yet Mar-a-Lago won't remain unchanged indefinitely. Whether through transactions, succession, court rulings, or the forces of hurricanes and encroaching waters, its condition will inevitably evolve. Preparing for such shifts, looking past mere transfer to another tycoon, might unlock possibilities that benefit far beyond a select group of club enthusiasts. Fourth, and perhaps most crucially, the nation requires subtler perspectives on affluence overall. The tendency to view vast fortunes as clear indicators of talent, as signs of shrewdness, perseverance, or ethical virtue, hides the complex truth. Riches typically arise from a blend of legacy assets, fortunate circumstances, established networks, contributions from others, public facilities, regulatory safeguards, and occasionally real talent paired with effort. But those elements alone rarely suffice. Marjorie inherited a vast serial conglomerate. Trump received millions and a property development foundation from his father. Neither began from scratch, even as both embraced iterations of that origin story. Such narratives carry weight because they recast disparities as a tale of moral righteousness, portraying them as deserved, inherent, and all but predestined, rather than outcomes of deliberate policies, entrenched legacies, and the buildup of advantages. More candid accounts of prosperity would encompass legacies, fiscal policies, zoning regulations, racial and gender factors, migration backgrounds, and sheer chance. These tales wouldn't eliminate disparities, but they could create room to question if the prevailing allocation of assets truly advances the nation, or if alternative models might better support a broader population. These discussions prove challenging. They unsettle long-held U.S. tales of self-reliance, achievement through merit, and the inherent virtue of amassing riches. They compel those profiting from the status quo to acknowledge that the playing field has never been entirely level, that individual triumphs rest upon frameworks unavailable to many. Mar-a-Lago can't mandate these dialogues, yet its past provides tangible starting points, tangible, irrefutable instances that render vague concepts concrete. Questions of access and entitlement, labor contributions and compensation, the merging of state authority and personal riches within one estate's boundaries. The lingering query is whether the public will seize these openings or persist in symbolic battles while preserving the foundational systems Mar-a-Lago so plainly illuminates untouched. 12 swells against that barrier. Those systems would endure past the debates, much like the estate had surpassed its creators. Daybreak arrived at Mar-a-Lago, as it had for almost 100 years. Sunlight crossed the ocean, illuminating the surf initially, then the beach, then the barrier wall dividing sea from grounds. The identical wall that laborers had constructed and layered back in the 1920s, mended post-tempests, bolstered repeatedly, yet unaltered in its core function. Repelling tides that might otherwise swallow the terrain. The sea showed patience. It could bide its time. Within the estate, everyday operations resumed. Guards rotated duties. Cooks arrived to ready morning meals. Upkeep crews inspected the mechanisms that constantly required oversight. The structure insisted on attention, just as before, just as onward. That persistence might represent Mar-a-Lago's most evident reality. Underneath the disputes and icons, below the partisan clashes and court documents, it persisted as a tangible edifice, upheld solely by tangible toil. News cycles turned. Proprietors would eventually shift. The significance linked to the site ebbed and flowed with societal tempests. But the labor of preservation continued. Performed by individuals whose identities would evade historical records, whose viewpoints wouldn't influence the accounts, whose steady toil enabled all other tales. Those employees recognized a truth that onlookers frequently overlooked. Structures aren't truly defined by deed holders or even blueprint designers. Structures embody the perpetual dialogue between human endeavor and material limits. Masonry erodes, coatings flake, circuits degrade. Landscapes overrun with overgrowth absent cultivation. The estate's endurance hinged not on lofty designs or pivotal events, but on unassuming recurring duties, spotting incipient failures and remedying them daily, annually, across generations. Marjorie recognized this to some degree. She employed personnel, financed maintenance, covered revamps. Yet, she regarded those as tools toward a goal, the cost of preserving her vision. She didn't entirely comprehend, or perhaps chose not to, that the toil formed the essence, while the vision was mere image. The estate's truth lay in the work that upheld it. All other aspects were merely illusions projected upon that foundation. Trump perceived it in his own way, though no more profoundly. He viewed the mansion as a financial holding, a trademark, a theatrical backdrop. He recognized the need for upkeep, yet he regarded it as mere operational expense, something to reduce rather than the core endeavor that infused the site with genuine purpose. His connection to Mar-a-Lago was one of exploitation. How might it benefit him? In what ways could it enhance his public persona? What profits could he extract before departing? Neither perspective truly respected the essence of the structure itself. It represented an enduring partnership among those who envisioned it, those who constructed it, those who preserved its operations, and the elemental powers, winds, waves, sunlight, and brine, that, perpetually challenged the endurance of human endeavor. The sea relentlessly battered the seawall. Climate shifts were accelerating the wear on Florida's shorelines. Ocean levels were climbing in quantifiable, recorded increments. Tempests were intensifying. In mere decades, or perhaps even sooner, Mar-a-Lago might confront a genuine peril to its survival, not stemming from legal battles or partisan disputes, but from inexorable natural laws, tides advancing, earth subsiding, the inherent fragility of erecting opulent edifices on slender coastal spits amid a volatile atmosphere. This peril was impartial. Unlike human rivalries, the waters paid no heed to real estate prices, campaign rhetoric, or cultural heritage. They would assail Mar-a-Lago, just as they did humble bungalows and communal sands, probing every base, exposing every flaw, reclaiming all that couldn't be fortified. Eventually, the seawall would give way. Perhaps it could be reconstructed, elevated, reinforced with cutting-edge methods. Perhaps innovations might postpone the inevitable, or perhaps not. Future inhabitants might gaze upon photos of Mar-a-Lago as we now do, at pictures of lost seaside villages, stunning relics, now erased, surrendered to mightier dominions, beyond any person's fortune or determination. Should that demise occur, it would impart wisdom that political uproars never could. It would reveal that splendor is fleeting, authority bounded, and natural rhythms dwarf human theatrics. The very sea that rendered Mar-a-Lago's vistas invaluable would ultimately overpower the barriers designed to enclose them. Yet that lies ahead. The here and now proffered subtler insights, open to any who truly observed. The insight of persistence. Labor persists amid the clamor of news cycles. Everyday toil upholds exceptional venues. Preservation rather than pageantry prevents collapse. The insight of intricacy. Sites embody layered realities simultaneously. A lone edifice can be simultaneously alluring and flawed, praiseworthy and contentious. History resists neat alignment with any faction's narrative. The insight of repercussions. Individual decisions ripple into communal outcomes. Private drives mold shared existence. The bygone era isn't tucked securely in the rear view, but interlaced with today, steering perceptions of feasibility and fate. Grasping these requires no specialized knowledge, merely focus, the readiness to regard Mar-a-Lago, not solely as an emblem for debate, but as a tangible site with a tangible history, forged by tangible hands, upheld by tangible sweat, positioned in a tangible landscape that will ultimately dictate its lifespan. 13. What we choose to remember. Focus was elective, and selections on recollection molded the legacy for tomorrow. Mar-a-Lago's narrative would echo through retellings. But which iteration would endure? Would it center on Marjorie's societal drive? A female magnate erecting a chateau to affirm her stature? Would it highlight Trump's recasting of the grounds as the arena for governance? The seasonal presidential retreat that materialized yet stirred more debate than acclaim? Would it focus on the affair of sealed files, crates in a grand hall, the instant a stately home turned into fodder for a national inquiry? Or might it encompass broader strands, declining to elevate one as the definitive account? Symbolic locales risked morphing into vessels for imposed interpretations. Mar-a-Lago could embody U.S. extravagance or ingenuity, graft or initiative, societal rifts or pathways to success. Any such lens could be bolstered by selective evidence. Each advanced specific agendas, political or philosophical, and each concealed as much as it illuminated. True remembrance entailed countering this simplification, affirming that venues harbor conflicting verities, even when they defy easy verdicts. Mar-a-Lago stood as an extraordinary architectural feat and a testament to disparity. It was simultaneously a salvage from ruin and a tool for merging civic role with personal gain. It served as a livelihood for scores of workers and an emblem brandished in broader national contests. All these aspects coexisted simultaneously. Embracing that meant embracing paradoxes without the urge to simplify them prematurely. It involved navigating nuance without shoehorning it into a tidy ethical narrative. The archives would retain key unyielding details, like building timelines, sequences of proprietors, architectural specifics, legal disputes, but isolated data alone didn't equate to insight. True comprehension demanded background analysis and the courage to probe thorny issues. Which narratives got documented and which vanished, which viewpoints got boosted and which got suppressed. The laborers who constructed and upkept Mar-a-Lago merit inclusion in that narrative, not as mere backdrop, but as pivotal players whose efforts were indispensable, rivaling any blueprint from an architect or vision from a proprietor. Whenever possible, their identities ought to be documented. Their job environments should be detailed. Their viewpoints, when it was safe to voice them, deserve placement next to those of presidents, heiresses, and builders. The natural surroundings warrant comparable focus. Mar-a-Lago didn't exist in isolation. It occupied a slender coastal strip, reliant on delicate habitats and vulnerable to escalating waters and fiercer tempests. Opting to erect grand, enduring edifices in such spots betrayed overconfidence in humanity's dominion over the environment, a notion eroding with each stormy period. Scholars of tomorrow could well critique not only Mar-a-Lago, but the entire trend of opulent seaside development it epitomized, deeming it profoundly short-sighted, a denial of environmental boundaries that global warming would ultimately impose. The financial foundations enabling Mar-a-Lago also invite examination. Marjorie's wealth stemmed from the food industry, built on farming toil and vast retail demand. Trump's riches arose from property development, intertwined with finance, fiscal rules, land use regulations, and enduring legacies of racial bias and exclusion. No such wealth sprang from pure individual effort. Each depended on systemic supports, regulatory systems, and the contributions of countless others. Rigorous history exposes those underpinnings, rather than perpetuating tales of solitary entrepreneurial triumph. The mansion's societal significance would continue evolving. Priorities of the 2020s might strike 2070s onlookers as trivial or baffling. The partisan tempests that branded the estate notorious would dissipate as key figures exited and fresh scandals emerged. Yet the structure itself, should it endure, would persist as a tangible relic of 20th century drive and 21st century discord, overlaid with interpretations that successive eras would reevaluate and refine. Such ongoing reassessment was unavoidable. The true challenge lay in whether it would be thorough or superficial, whether ensuing generations of Americans would grapple with backdrop and intricacy, or merely overlay their current fears onto the past, warping it to serve immediate agendas while disregarding actual events. Learning provided a key bulwark against superficial readings. Should Mar-a-Lago transform into a museum or preserved landmark, feasible yet no sure thing, it might convey multiple teachings concurrently. Guided tours of its architecture could complement dives into workforce chronicles. Talks on aesthetics and artistry might parallel examinations of social divides, ethnicity, and disparity. Appreciation for its form needn't obliterate clear-sighted acknowledgement of who profited from it and who bore its costs. Still, such learning hinges on funding, organizations, and civic backing, all of which must be cultivated. It's quite possible that Mar-a-Lago stays under private control forever, its tale then molded by subsequent holders, its essence shaped by promotional priorities over factual candor. That scenario wouldn't be inherently villainous, but it would squander a potent educational asset, consigning a vital, instructive resource to an exclusive enclave. Ultimately, the decision rests with the American public as a whole, even if channeled via the deeds of a select few. It's not solely about Mar-a-Lago's destiny, but about the nation they aim to uphold, the values they choose to celebrate, the inquiries they're prepared to pursue, the inheritance they seek to bestow. Structures echo back the decisions of their creators. Mar-a-Lago, amid all it represents, serves as a looking glass, reflecting facets of the American character, some appealing, some unsettling, all illuminating. Whether lessons emerge from that gaze hinges solely on the depth of honesty in confronting it. 14. Beyond Mar-a-Lago, a template, not an anomaly. True scrutiny extends far past one estate. Mar-a-Lago stood as no outlier. Throughout the country, parallel tales unfolded in varied mansions under diverse stewards, yet with strikingly uniform threads. The Gilded Age bequeathed scores of sprawling compounds. Estates like the Vanderbilt residences, Hearst Castle, and the DuPont estates stand as grand tributes to personal fortunes. They were constructed by laborers whose identities have largely faded from memory. Each one reflected entrenched views on social hierarchy and authority that profoundly influenced the fabric of American society. Over time, numerous such sites transformed into museums or community spaces. The breakers in Newport, Biltmore in North Carolina, and Vizcaya in Miami now fulfill instructive purposes, recounting their pasts with differing levels of candor regarding the workforce behind their creation and the disparities they symbolized. Mar-a-Lago stood apart, primarily due to its continued private ownership and involvement in contemporary political spheres. Yet the profound inquiries it sparked, concerning amassed riches, undervalued workforces, and the conflict between personal assets and communal welfare, were far from isolated to this single residence. These issues were woven into the very core of American capitalism. Comparable forces appeared in other arenas. Silicon Valley tycoons erected isolated retreats in Hawaii or Montana, vast properties that uprooted nearby populations and devoured natural resources while offering scant immediate advantages to the wider public. Wall Street leaders upheld portfolios of residences, each demanding employees paid mere slivers of the immense worth of the homes they tended. The core dynamic linking vast fortunes to the broader populace remained essentially unaltered from Marjorie's time. It had merely evolved into fresh guises, varied terrains, and updated rationales. Grasping Mar-a-Lago's narrative fully meant viewing it within this broader tapestry. The estate wasn't an odd exception, but a vivid illustration, a lens into the ways American culture structures itself around affluence, who profits from such arrangements, and who shoulders the expenses. This insight carries weight for future instances, when a contentious estate seizes public attention. Such moments will arise again. The inquiries linger, ready. Who constructed it? In what circumstances? For how much compensation? Who sustains its operations? What societal strains arise from this exclusive opulence? Where did the proprietor's riches originate? What mechanisms facilitated such gatherings? Ultimately, whose interests does the holding advance? These probes extend equally to recent ventures as to historic domains, to personal dwellings and business endeavors, to local assets and international properties. Specifics shift, yet the foundational principles endure. Fortunes pooled among a select few, drawing on assets that might benefit multitudes, yielding striking or awe-inspiring venues inaccessible to the majority. All reliant on systematically underpaid and overlooked efforts, posing these questions persistently, resisting the dazzle of marble and crystal fixtures, keeping sight of the human and ecological tolls hidden under the grandeur. This practice extends well past Mar-a-Lago. It demands doubt toward opulence, not outright dismissal, but genuine interest in money's origins and impacts. It calls for vigilance regarding influence, beyond just votes and laws, into control of land, sway over economies, and proximity to pivotal influencers. It necessitates perceiving splendor and damage in tandem, to value artistry even as one highlights abuse, to accept that people's works are invariably blended, neither wholly virtuous nor entirely tainted. Such scrutiny proves challenging. It's simpler to laud achievements without question or to revile them entirely, easier to choose a faction and champion it than to grapple with uncertainty and inconsistency. Yet, simplistic tales yield superficial insights, and superficial insights allow recurring cycles in novel contexts, as prior experiences go unheeded. Mar-a-Lago presents an opportunity for growth, should individuals seize it. Its almost century-spanning journey holds teachings on drive and indulgence, on toil and extravagance, on the overlap of personal holdings and societal good, on how structures mirror and mold the worlds around them. These teachings adapt readily. They fit myriad other initiatives, choices, and discussions. But teachings demand learners. They hinge on readiness to concede that truth outstrips ideological slogans, that favored beliefs may be partial or flawed, that structures we enjoy can harbor inequities. They urge forbearance in exploring backgrounds and fortitude to confront harsh facts rather than evade them. Whether Americans as a whole possess that forbearance and fortitude remains unresolved. The heated clashes over Mar-a-Lago hint at the contrary. That allegiance to parties and group affiliations frequently overshadows subtlety. That crowds often favor neat tales over tangled truths. That the resident serves more as ammunition in disputes than a subject for thoughtful inquiry. Yet societal discourse isn't inevitable fate. Personal decisions retain significance. Anyone who comes across the tale of Mar-a-Lago, whether via media coverage, films, literature, or a fleeting view from afar in Palm Beach, ends up deciding what to focus on, what to probe, and what to hold dear. When those minor judgments multiply among thousands or even millions, they slowly mold how a community views its own identity and what it resolves to alter or safeguard. The estate can't dictate those judgments. It simply remains in its long-standing spot, its history open to view for anyone willing to explore it. The recurring themes are evident. The insights are present. The lingering issue boils down to how individuals will respond to what they uncover. 15. The decision at hand. The decision loomed right away and showed no signs of fading. Mar-a-Lago's narrative remained unfolding. Court battles progressed through the judicial system. Political battles evolved. The property continued to show its age, demanding upkeep. The sea edged nearer with each passing season. The future would emerge from choices unfolding at that very moment. In legal chambers and legislative sessions, in newsrooms and online forums, in casual chats with acquaintances and heated debates at home, those choices would subtly expose what the nation truly prized. Were transparency or seclusion more important? Accountability or leniency toward riches? The greater good or unyielding ownership rights? None of these dilemmas were straightforward. Sensible folks could differ, yet the inquiries held weight since they brought buried values into the light. Mar-a-Lago also raised a more intimate individual query for those who crossed paths with its legacy. What sort of bond did you seek with affluence and influence? Would you root for it unquestioningly? Fantasize about becoming part of it? Uphold it as evidence of diligence's rewards? Or would you dismiss it entirely? View lavishness solely as oppression, reduce complexities to heroes and oppressors, or pursue something tougher? To perceive sharply, to recognize both successes and damages, to balance conflicting realities, without simplifying them into a tidy judgment. That approach demanded the most and rang truest. It called for work and a touch of modesty. It swapped reassuring absolutes for genuine insight, tidy wrap-ups for sharper inquiries, instant anger for sustained involvement. Mar-a-Lago deserved such scrutiny, not due to any inherent holiness in the structure or exceptional drama in its past, but because it stood plainly before all, a tangible emblem rendering vast conceptual concerns concrete. A parcel of land where threads of American existence, social strata, ethnicity, governance, toil, ecology, journalism, intertwined within a compact domain. The estate endured on its 17 acres, bearing almost a full century of layered events, awaiting the country's verdict on its significance. That verdict would reflect less on the residence itself, and more on its observers. Their observations, their oversights, the teachings they embraced or dismissed. The surf persisted against the barrier. The edifice endured for the moment while time pressed on, unyielding and inexorable, leaving less room for anyone to feign that the decision wasn't theirs to shape.